Good evening.
Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Okay, Baruch Hashem. How we gotta do with Facebook? So we got a little bit more Bit Yosef, and then we're done. Go to Shulchan Aruch. So it says in Bit Yosef like this. Ve'im tomar, if you're gonna tell me, im ken amai tzrich la asrichinan levahu deotze adam tefillin. If so, why do we need to talk about the person who's going out tefillin? Erev Shabbat, Erev Shabbat. Im chashecha, when it's getting dark. The mehav tama, to give reason, mishum de'eno masiach da'ato mehem, that he doesn't divert his attention from it. It will be allowed anyway, regardless. Mishum de'eno motziam biado, because he's not taking them, carrying them with his hands. Rather, he's wearing it, right? So when he's wearing it, it's like clothing. So that's similar to the case of the needle, which is inserted into the clothing. The idiot that a person who's not a professional can go out like that. He can carry it like that. So why is that? Because he's wearing it as clothing, like an ornament. Because even if he would go out on Shabbat like that, Patur, he'd be absolved anyway. Sheken b'tfilin de'afilu leman de'amar Shabbat. So it says, Kol sheken b'tfilin, all the more so tefillin, that we say that, according to one who says that on Shabbat, tefillin is not the time for tefillin. Who im yatsa b'hem eno chayav chatat. If he went out with them, he wouldn't be liable for that sin offering. Mishum derech malbush avida, because that's the way of clothing, wearing it. Kedita perk b'amed isha o yatzeh. It says that in this perk, samech aluf amud alif. this is not only that, אלא דזימנין דנפיק בהו בשבת. Sometimes it goes out with on Shabbat lechatchila. Even lechatchila can go out without like Shabbat. How is that? Because the time, like we learned in the Mishnah, beresh perek hamotzi tefillin. Person who finds tefillin on Shabbat, he's allowed to wear it and carry it like that into the house. So there, for sure, it's allowed to go out with it close to the darkness. So he says, we can say that it's true that the leberosho, to go out with it on his head, even without the reason that he's just masiach dato, he's not diverting his attention. Shar, it's allowed. So we don't want to read this reason. Rather, only when he goes out with them, when he's holding in his hand. Or they're wrapped in the skirt of his clothing. So in a case like that, he would be liable for a sin offering on Shabbat. Nevertheless, they didn't decree, right? I have Shabbat with this, with darkness, mishum, because he won't divert his attention from them. So therefore, he's going to remember and not come to carry it. Okay, great. Let's move on. But the Rambam says in Perek Yutet, Lo yatzeh hayat b'Shabbat. The tailor should not go on Shabbat. Machat tchuva with the needle which is stuck into the bigdo, his clothing. If he did go out like that, he would be absolved. V'chein pasak Rabbeinu b'siman Shin Aleph. That's what Rabbeinu Tur says in this Siman chapter. In can ha poskim kerab meir. If so, they're poskim like Rabbi Meir. But tzarich lomar ledibrahem zematnitin dekatene. And we have to say, right, in order to reconcile, that they're talking about, according to the words of the Mishnah, dekatene lo yatzeh hayat b'machato. They say that the tailor should not go out with a needle. Lav tavka hayat. It's not only a tailor. Dehu adin lechol adam. Same also applies to everybody. Ela dibru chachamim ba'hoveh. But the rabbis talked about the frequent, common case. And if when he goes out with it, it's inserted into his clothing. Even if he's a tailor, it's allowed. Because even if he go out like that on Shabbat, he wouldn't be liable for a sin offering. So therefore, we don't decree also Erev Shabbat. Because we don't make one decree on another decree. Rather, he says, you have to say, right, against your will, that he only forbids when he's taking it with his hand. Matniti in the Mishnah, Erev Shabbat. Because if you would go out like that on Shabbat, Chayav Chatat, he'd be liable on sin offering. So he says there's no difference between the tailor and any other person. And that which says that person can go out with tefillin on Erev Shabbat. In such a manner, right, comes out, it's explained, if he was taking them out on his head, even without the reason that doesn't divert his attention from him, Havashara, it will be allowed. Because if you go out like that with them on Shabbat, there would not be any prohibition, not prohibition, but there would not be any obligation. Okay. It wasn't for the reason that he's not going to divert his mind from them. Will be forbidden on Shabbat, on our Shabbat, just like the similar to the needle. Rambam also says this in this perk. That the tailor should not go out with his needle on his hand, also not the scribe with his reed. Erev Shabbat samuch lechashicha, close to darkness. And maybe he'll forget and take it out outside, outdoors. Mutar letzet tefillin erev Shabbat. You're allowed to go erev Shabbat with tefillin. When it's getting dark, before darkness. Why? Because the person is, obligated to always grope his tefillin, right, when he's wearing it. At all times. So therefore he won't forget it. He won't divert his attention from it. So you see that he wrote very explicitly regarding the tailor, he's only forbidden when the needle is in his hands. Same thing also when it comes to the scribe with his reed. And since it says tefillin together with them, implies that he's talking about when he goes out in his hands. Just like the similar to the tailor with his needle, with his hand. So he says, this is the reason why I needed the reason that and since he's obligated to grope with them, grope with tefillin, call shah in every moment, he won't forget it. So he says we can prove that when he says it's allowed, let's say between Shabbat, with darkness, it's talking about what's going on with his hands. It doesn't say that he's allowed to go out with tefillin on his head. Close by, he writes that if he forgot and he went out with them to the public domain, and now he remembers, right, that he has tefillin on his head. Mashma dechi katane mutar implies that when it says, right, when it teaches that it's allowed, it says between to go out with tefillin hoyel vechayav lemashmesh beyotze behem biyado, since he's obligated to grope with them when he takes them with his hand, goes out with them in his hand. Biyadoi. That's talking about with his hands. So it could be that this was the intention of the Rif and the Rosh. So it could be also that this is the opinion of the Rabbeinu, the two. And even though he wrote that even with tefillin, mutar said he's allowed to go out. He's not allowed to divert his attention from them. And when they're still in his head, right? We can say that it means to say like this. Since that even when they're on his head, he's not allowed to divert his attention from them. All the more so when they're in his hands. Okay. So that was Vav. There's one more little one, Zain, afterwards, but first we'll do Shulchan Aruch Hanes. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. Okay, I'm just going to get some water, if you don't mind. Give me a second. Okay, let's get back to it. So we're going to do Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this: Lo yotze adam erev Shabbat samuch lechashecha b'machato. Right? You shouldn't go out a person close to darkness with his needle, as we said, right? Be'ado, with his hand. Velo b'kul muso, also not with his reed, right? We're talking about like a writing utensil, pen, whatever. Shema yishkach be'otzi. So why is that? Because he may forget, and carry it on Shabbat. What does that mean? As we said yesterday, right? Talking about going outside. אבל מותר לצאת בתפילין סמוך לחשיכה. He's allowed to go out with tefillin, right? לפי שאינו משוך אחד. Why is that? Because he doesn't divert his attention from them. So therefore, we're not concerned he's going to come to carry it. Okay, great. That's it. So we got one more. for this chapter. So it says here, time. Right. So we read this yesterday in the tour. We said, right, that before you go outside on Shabbat or Erev Shabbat, we're talking about Erev Shabbat really. Check your pockets, right? Make sure nothing is in there. You're going to come to carry it on Shabbat. So it says Bet Yosef, what's the source for this? Perek Kama the Shabbat, right? First perek of Shabbat, Yud Bet Amud Aleph. That's it, very short. So let's see Shulchan Aruch here. Mitzvah lemashmesh adam lekelev be'erev Shabbat. As we said, Erev Shabbat, person should check his pockets. When it's getting close to darkness, שלא יהיה בהם דברי אסור, דבר שאסור. There shouldn't be something there which is forbidden. That's it פה בשבת, to go out without Shabbat. So, right, this word samuch, which means close to, right, that means half hour. You know, so we're talking about a half hour before Shabbat comes in. So meaning what? A half hour before sunset. The truth is, it doesn't really say sunset. It says darkness, right? That's the more accurate version of it. So that would mean that since it gets dark about half hour after sunset, even less than that, right? I mean, for the sake of Shabbat, we're talking about like 13 minutes, whatever. So therefore, you'd have to check your pocket like a quarter, 15 minutes before Shabbat, before sunset. That would be the best way. But as we said, right, if you have an eruv, it's not really so necessary, this thing. But it is good to do it anyway, you know, and I'll tell you why, because you know, you don't want to have muktzah in there either, you know what I mean? So it's a good idea to you know, make sure your pockets are empty before you go out. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. So he says something like this, right? He says, if you're going out on Shabbat and you're going past the eruv, that would also be a reason to check it, right? Okay, makes sense. So we're done with this chapter. We'll go to Reish Nun Gimel. So, what does it say here? Kira shehi asuya kikdera. When you have a stove and it's made like a pot, in other words, it has the structure of a pot, similar to it. V'shofatin al pi kdera. So what we do is, we put like a pot on top of it, right? So this is the way they did things in the old days. They had a stove, right, which had like holes in it. So those holes are meant to place pots in there, to hold them. Lemala, right from the top. Ve'yesh ba shfitat makom shte kederot. So how many holes does it have? It has two. Right, today we have four, we got four things, right? Going four grates. In those days, basically the standard was two. אם הוא סקה בגפת שהיא פסולה של זיתים, פסולת של זיתים. So he says, if that stove was lit with gefet, right? So what's gefet? So he says that's the refuse of olives. Or be'etzim, or with wood. Asur liten aleyah tavshil. So it's not allowed to put on top of it a cooked dish before Shabbat. Le'ashoto aleha letzorech halayla. To leave it there for the night. You're not allowed to do that. Ela im ken yitbashel kol tzorko, unless it was totally cooked. Ve'hu mitzamek ve'ralo. And also, right, if it's shriveling up, it's drying out, it's bad for it. Or shaya chai shelo nitbashel klal. Or the other scenario is that it's raw and it wasn't cooked at all. So we're not concerned in that case. He's going to come to stir the coals. Why? Because it was cooked all right, all that it needs. And also, when it's raw, right, he diverts his attention from it. Until tomorrow. So all night it can cook below chitui without any stirring. But if it got cooked a little bit, like machal ben rusai. So how much is that? Shehu shlish bishlo. It's 1/3. Got cooked 1/3. It didn't get cooked all the way, all that it needs. Or let's say it was cooked all the way. If it shrivels and it's good for it, dries out, good for it. So you're not allowed to put it on top of that. Right? Unless he removed the coals, he raked out the coals there beforehand. פירוש שיוצאים ממנו גחלים, או כתם, או כתם פי שכיסה גחלים באפר. Or the other option is that he covered the coals with ashes. למעט החומה, to diminish its heat. Because we're concerned he's going to stir it up. Because it's fitting to eat at night as well. By stirring it. But if you put like a raw piece of meat in there or some kind of raw food, mutar, it's allowed. As if like all of it was raw. Because once he puts that in, he diverts his mind from it. He's not going to eat it tonight. He's going to eat tomorrow. Because of the raw cut of food, right, which is not going to cook until tomorrow. But if he puts it next to a pot, בסמוך חוצה למותר. I'll say that one more time. אבל לסמוך לקדרה, but to put a pot next to it, חוצה, outside of it, mutar, it's allowed. אפילו אינה גרופה, right. So that you're allowed to do. So what are we talking about? He's saying, right, that instead of putting the pot on top, as we said, right, on top of that hole, he puts it like towards the side, on the side of it. So that's allowed. Even though the coals were not removed. Okay, so this is like one big chapter here. And actually, I'm not saying it right because this is the tour. We have to go to Beit Yosef. Let's see. Okay. So it says Beit Yosef over here. Paresh b'Gemara, right? Explains the Gemara. The kirahu makom shfitat shte kederot. As we said, right, that the stove has like two holes on it to put the pots on top. Vei b'Tema b'Gemara, and it says it asks in the Gemara there. They ask the question. Lamed vav amud bet. Hai lo iten lav yachaz. Hai lo iten lo yachaziru. So it says instead of saying that you shouldn't put it, you should say that you shouldn't return it. But we're allowed to leave it there. What do you care? Even though it's not coals are not removed. So it says this is according to Hananiah. Tanya Hananiah Omer, because we learned, right, that Hananiah says in the Braita, whatever is cooked 1/3, you're allowed to put it on top of the stove. Even though it's not raked out of the coals. Or perhaps, right, we're talking about where he has to leave it there. And if it's raked out in, yes, you're allowed to do it. If not, no. If not, so no. All the more so, right, when it comes to returning it. So they deliberated over there regarding this issue. Ishmatin Tuva, thoroughly there. So we tried to answer the question, right? But there's no conclusion there. Afterwards, right? There's another story there. This this rabbi says, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, name of this rabbi, Kitama ve'uvara ve'mishehi alea chamin, mashina lachamim. Shulchamu kol tzorkan. Right, so once you have removed the coals, raked out the coals, we can put something there, like something hot, the tafshil shebishel kol tzorko, and a cooked dish which was totally 100% cooked, all right. Shmamina mistamek ve'afelo. So you see from there that it's something which is good when it dries out. Mutar, it's allowed. Something like that is allowed. The dache, and it deflects that. Hatam the kitama the ita subigima. There, it's talking about where he removed the coals, and it says there furthermore in the Gemara, Lamezain a little bit. Amar Rabba bar Bachana. This rabbi said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ketama be'ovara mishin alea chamin shulchmu kol tzorkan. So it says, right, if they remove the coals, you're allowed to put some hot dish on it. Tafshil shebishel kol tzorko. Also something, a dish which was fully cooked. Shmamina mistamek ve'afeh lo mutar. So you see from there, if it's drying out and it's good for it, it's allowed. So I'll explain to you what that means, right? There are certain foods where if you dry it out, and the liquid starts to evaporate, it's going to dry out, and get spoiled. That means it's not good for it. But if it's going to get even better as it dries out, so then it's good for it. That's a different story. Okay, so goes on. So it says that it deflects this and says different here. The kitma mashma sheim lo bishel kol tzorko, because when it says, right, that you remove the ashes, that if you didn't cook it all the way, all that it needs, even if it was fully cooked, if it's shriveling up and it's getting better, so then you're not allowed to place it there without raking it out the coals. Okay. Afterwards, he says we have it's written there, Amrav Sheshat, Amrav Yochanan, that these rabbis said, Kira she'isikua begefet ve'etzim, that a stove which was heated up, right, fired up, with this olive refuse or wood, mashina le'a chamin, you're allowed to put hot food there on top of it, shelo chamu kol tzorkan, even if it wasn't heated up all the way, all its need. Tafshil shelo bishel kol tzorko, and a dish which was not fully cooked, ikar akar lo yachazir ad shegrof o ad sheiten. If it's something which was fully cooked and then he took it off the fire, you shouldn't return it back on the fire until he removes all the coals, breaks out the coals. Or sheitin ha'eper, or until he puts there the ashes. Kasava matnitin lachazir tanan. So this opinion holds that the Mishnah is talking about where you return it. Aval le'ashot mashin, when it comes to keeping it there, you're allowed to keep it there. Even though it's not raked out, the coals. Rashi says, right, it's machukatin imoraim, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabba tarbayu tenanhi leshlishot. So Rabba says both of them, we learned there, right, that to leave it there, tanina, and not tanin in, not tanin et apar, we don't put the pot. I'm sorry, we don't put the food there, the bread, the tanur in the bread, in the oven. I'm sorry. Im chashecha, when it's getting dark. Ela kadesh yikremu panea, unless it's enough time that it should get crusty, right? The bread form a crust. Ha kamu panea share. Once it forms a crust, it's allowed. The chazir nami tanina, regarding returning it also, right? We learned Bet Hillel omrim en machzirin. Bet Hillel says we can't return it. The adkan lo sharu le Bet Hillel ela grufa ktuma. The Bet Hillel only allows when it's already raked out. Aval b'shena grufa ktuma. But if it's not raked out, lo, it's not allowed. Rashi explains ki karmu panea, when it got crusty, share, it's allowed. V'hainu lo bishel kol tzorko. That's when it wasn't fully cooked. The tanur lo garuf v'katum, and also the oven is not raked out. Lo katum hu. Okay. Ooh, it's a long story here. Okay, we're not going to finish this today, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, let's move on. So it says, "V'chein katav Rambam." The Rambam says, "Per Gimel, katav Rav Magid." Right? Says Rav Magid regarding that. So Rambam also holds like that, and then he says Rav Magid says regarding that. V'shechin dat Ramban. Ramban also holds this way. But Rashi samach. But Rashi, on the other hand, ahad yam Rav Sheshat. He relies on what was said by Rav Sheshat. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, name Rabbi Yochanan. V'amai the Saye Rabba Katav Sham, and that which Rabba helped him, assisted him. And it says there, it's written there, and it says that, and we, right, that do actually put it on top of the stove. We leave it there. Shena grufa, that which is not raked out, ade Hananiah samchina. It says we do like Hananiah, the opinion of Hananiah. Why? Because we learned in the Mishnah like him. It's taught in the Mishnah like him. Like we said, ha karmut share. But if it got crusty, it's allowed. The bread. Amar Rav Sheshat Mishmeh de Rabbi Yochanan. These rabbis said kivate like him, the matnitin like the Mishnah, the pirkin like our Mishnah perk. Mishum chazara hu the bae grifa. So it says when it comes to returning it, that's when it needs to be emptied out, raked out. Aval dishot, lo, but just to leave it there, we don't need that. Shen katvu aran, that's what it says in Aran. V'shem Rabbeinu Hai, the name Rabbeinu Hai. The Tosfot, also Tosfot. Okay. V'shem Rabbeinu Chananel, name Rabbi Chananel. V'shem hu da'atam kimo shekatvu b'sof perek kama. And they also agree with this, right, in the end of the first perek. Amaydi Aminan, regarding that which we said. Bashir v'la bashir, right? If something is like partially cooked, right? Asur lichtov arav, asur, forbidden הרב מגיד פרק ג' וכתב למגיד, said למגיד פרק ג' שכן דת רשב"א also holds like that, וכן דת הסמ"ג וסמ"ק והתרומה והגאות מימוניות, all these rabbis also wrote like that. פרק ג' וכן כתב המורדכי פרק קירה, and Mordechai also says this, בשם אור זרוע, name אור זרוע. And he says, if that's the case, that which we said. So per kama, in the end of the first perk, Yulchat Amud Bet, Bashir Shapir Dame, Bashir Velo Bashir Asur. If it's really cooked, then it's okay. You can leave it there. If it's not fully cooked, Asur, not allowed. V'dat Arif V'siato Me'et Sheitchil Bashel. He says the Rif and his contemporaries, they hold from the time that it started to cook, ben shelo igia lamachal ben dusai, whether it got to a third cooked, ben sheigia, or whether it is a third cooked or not, afilu nitbashel kol tzorko, even if it was totally cooked, ela shehu nisamek ve'afelo, but it's getting dried out, right, and improving. Okay. Lo mikre bashil velo bashil. It's not called partially cooked. Ve'asur, forbidden. Kishenit bashil kol tzorko. Once it cooks all that it needs, nistamek veralo, and it's drying out and spoiling like that, getting worse. Bashil b'shapir. It's called already cooked. B'shapir dame le'ashuye. So therefore, you're allowed to leave it there in that condition. Udat Rashi. So it's according to Rashi, the Siato and his contemporaries. Kol she'igia lemachal ben dusai. Once it got to third cooked, nikre bashil. It's called cooked. V'shapir dame le'ashuye. And you're allowed to leave it there like that. V'lo mikre bashil. It's not called v'lo bashil. It's not partially cooked. Not called partially cooked. The asur the ashuye al gabe kira. That's forbidden to leave there, to leave it on the top of the stove. Shena gufa ktum, unless it's raked out. Ela kasheitchil leitbashel, unless when it started to cook. Velo igia, and it didn't come yet to the third cook, right? That level. The nachal ben dusai. So just to explain to you, right, some of these terms, I hope you understand them, but if not, I'll explain to you that, there's this concept of machal ben drusai. So what does that mean? Literally, right, it means that there was this guy, that was his name. He was like a crook, a bandit, this guy. So he would eat the food, like almost raw, only a third cooked, right? That's why we call it like that, machal ben drusai. It means it's a third cooked. Because this guy, this gangster, used to eat like that, because he was in a hurry. That's why we called that name. So what we're saying is, right, according to Hananiah, according to this opinion, once it's a third cooked, it's considered to be totally cooked. So therefore, you are allowed to put it on the stove, and leave it there like that. There is a big machloket about this, by the way, in the Poskin. So what we do, lechatchila, we're not lenient with this, So what does that mean? We want it to be fully cooked, not just 1/3. So if it's 1/3 cooked, it's still not fully cooked, and therefore, right, you shouldn't put it there. You shouldn't leave it there on Shabbat unless you remove the coals, right? As we said, you raked out the coals, or you covered them, right, with ashes, one or the other. So, what else do I want to tell you here? So bottom line is like this, right? Halacha wise, if the dish is fully cooked, okay, you can keep it on the stove, like, as is, uncovered. Like in our times, that will be allowed. If it's not fully cooked, right, even though it's 1/3 cooked, you should have the stove covered, with a metal plate, or use a plata, right? One of those two. That's how it compares to what we're saying over here in our generation. Okay, so I guess we'll stop there. We'll continue Bez Hashem next time. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. This is an important chapter, by the way. We're talking about the issue, of living, leaving foods on the stove and all kinds of stuff like that, and returning them back to the stove. All these things are very practical. So it's good to know this stuff. Okay, so Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow. Laila Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.